Hello, my name is Gustavo Ribeiro. I'm editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report, and we have our latest Brazil This Week broadcast with Cedê Silva from Brasília, our correspondent. Hello, Cedê, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine, Gustavo.
So, Cedê, the House and the Senate elected new leaders for the next 2 years. And I mean, in Brazil, and we had already written about this, we should not expect any of the drama that we saw in the US with 15 rounds of votes to select a new speaker. In Brazil, everything was much more straightforward, and in a matter of hours, we had already a new Senate president and a new House speaker. So today we're going to break down what the results mean for the Lula government moving forward. Cedê, where do you want to start? House or Senate?
Let's start with the Senate, I think, because the Senate was more important, that there's more newsworthy content on the Senate.
Yes, I mean, if we had any drama, it came from the Senate, right? So, Cedê, can you elaborate a little bit about what was at stake? Why do you say that the Senate was the most important one, and what was happening there?
Okay, so in the Senate, unlike in the House, there was a real dispute. You actually had two candidates with a chance to win. And this was also Lula versus Bolsonaro proxy war. Current Senate President Rodrigo Pacheco was backed very openly and publicly by the Lula administration. And he had a rival, newcoming Senator Rogério Marinho, who served as a Bolsonaro minister and was heavily backed by the Bolsonaro camp. What the Bolsonaro camp did on social media and with reporters in the press was to try to make the support for Marinho appear larger than what it really was. And at the end, Rodrigo Pacheco won by a comfortable margin. He needed 41 votes. He had 49 votes. So that's more votes than he needed to win. And he had a 17-vote advantage in relation to Rogério Marinho. So that's with the blue tie there. That's Rodrigo Pacheco. He was re-elected as Senate president for 2 more years. This, in my understanding, was not so much as big as a victory for the Lula administration as it was a defeat for the Bolsonaro camp. The Bolsonaristas were heavily expecting that they could oust Rodrigo Pacheco and they could have a hardcore Bolsonarista there, and as holding a great deal of power over the agenda of the Senate, they could block most of the Lula administration's agenda, and they could also discuss what they understand to be mishandlings or activism from Supreme Court justices. So they could go in a revengeful campaign against the Supreme Court justices, which the far right understands is an obstacle to the Bolsonarista agenda. This did not happen. Rodrigo Pacheco won, which is good news for the Lula administration.
And like you said, this was extremely important for the Lula administration because, so for people who are not familiar, it is in the Senate that we have confirmation hearings for things such as diplomats, government appointments, and also everything that regards the Supreme Court happens in the Senate. So, for instance, Congress has the prerogative of investigating the Supreme Court and of impeaching Supreme Court justices. So, I mean, something that has never been done and needs a massive majority. But if there's anywhere it could happen, it is in the Senate. So having a hardcore Bolsonarista ahead of the Senate would embolden it, especially because the Bolsonarista camp made inroads in the 2022 elections, and we have the Liberal Party, Bolsonaro's party, as the second biggest bench. And so, I mean, it was the biggest bench until we had a small reshuffling this past couple of days. But I mean, why do you say it was not so much a win for Lula? Because I mean, essentially, the Lula agenda in terms of increasing social spending, of a tax reform, everything that matters of the Lula agenda requires amending the constitution, that requires 60% majority, 2 rounds of voting in each congressional chamber. So having Rogério Marinho there would mean that Lula would start his administration already as a lame duck for 2 years. I mean, it was a win, right?
Yeah, I understand that it was a win for Lula, but not as much as a defeat for the Bolsonaro administration. And I say that because having Pacheco being re-elected as Senate president is no guarantee that these reforms will happen. It's still an uphill battle. You still have a lot of big center names. And as we mentioned in the newsletter to our subscribers, Marinho had 32 votes, which is more than enough if the opposition wants to create a select committee to disturb the Lula administration. So Rodrigo Pacheco won, but it's still an uphill battle to pass the agenda. However, having Rogério Marinho win would be a massive victory for Bolsonaro and would be absolutely disastrous for the Lula administration. You've mentioned something important, which was reshuffling. So originally, Bolsonaro's Liberal Party, the PL, won in the election the largest bench in both houses, House and Senate. However, at the last minute now, in late January, we had some senators changing parties, including Elisiane Gama, for example, and 3 senators migrated to Rodrigo Pacheco's party. And this was already very good news for Pacheco because this was an early indication that a lot of senators believed that Pacheco would win re-election. And so now you've got the scenario where Rodrigo Pacheco was re-elected. His party, which is also Gilberto Kassab's party, a famous political mover in Brazil, a famous mover and shaker in Brazil behind the scenes. He has the party has 15 out of 81 senators. And separately today, on Thursday, the senators vote separately on who gets the positions just below the Senate president. So you've got the first vice president, the secretary, and so on of the Senate's governing board. And they vote that separately, unlike the House. So they did this vote today. And what happened is that all members of the Senate board, so to speak, are Pacheco allies. And the Liberal Party, Bolsonaro's party, got none positions. They lost everything. They are absolutely not in the board. They have no positions at all. And Pacheco and Alcolumbri's group is the absolute leader of these key positions in the Senate.
Which is somewhat, and so that's somewhat unprecedented in a way, because the Senate usually is very keen on respecting preference depending on how big is your bench, right? Size really matters in the Senate. They usually say Senate president is elected by the biggest bench, and also a lot of positions in the directive board, right?
Yes, but this ticket, amazingly, was approved by a larger share of votes than Pacheco's win itself. They made this ticket with no Marinho allies, and they had 66 votes yes and 12 against, which means that some people in the big center that voted for Rogério Marinho decided to go with this formation anyway. And of course, there are some people there which are more malleable or flexible in their ideology. So one of the members of the governing board is Senator Chico Rodrigues. Senator Chico Rodrigues got nationally famous after the federal police went to his house and he tried to hide money in his underwear. And that's not the senator's assistant, that the senator itself hiding money in his underwear. Senator Chico Rodrigues was a member of the pro-Bolsonaro caucus, and he employed on his cabinet Léo Índio, which was one of the nephews of President Bolsonaro. And now Chico Rodrigues is in the Pacheco camp, I saw him yesterday.
And Leo Índio was recently arrested, right?
Who was recently arrested. Leo Índio participated in the January 8 riots. So that's a former employee of Senator Chico Rodrigues. And now Senator Chico Rodrigues is in the pro-democracy camp with Rodrigo Pacheco. I saw him yesterday at the Senate floor. He was beside Rodrigo Pacheco in the press conference. And now he's one of the guys in charge of the key Senate positions. You've mentioned the Liberal Party. What they can get now is, and what the senators will decide in the next coming days and weeks, is who gets to chair the key committees. So you've got the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Constitution and Justice Committee, the Economic Committee is going to be very important because of all the reforms that the Lula administration wants to approve. And this is where we'll see how the Liberal Party gets to chair some of these key committees.
And by the way, not to get too much into the nitty and gritty, but for people to understand why these committees are so important and why we have senators almost beating themselves up to get these positions, is because every bill must first go through the Constitution and Justice Committee and then go to the committee that is related to its subject. So if it's an economic bill, it goes to the Economic Affairs Committee. If it's something regarding diplomacy, Foreign Affairs Committee, and so on and so forth. So you can stall or make advance bills depending on where you are. And also there is that prestige aspect of being the chair in the committee as well. Cedê, before we continue...
just adding something to our readers, also some of these committees, they play key roles in nominating people for key positions, which is a bargaining tool from the government. So the president and the government, they get to appoint people for the federal regulation agencies, such as Anvisa, which is Brazil's equivalent to the FDA, ANS, which is a federal agency that oversees healthcare private plans, and you've got also Anatel, which is the telecommunications agency. The government appoints people for positions in these agencies, and the respective Senate committee gets to approve people whether or not you're going to be in these agencies. So being there is also an influence of whether or not key people get the job. And the other thing important about the Senate agenda, especially this time or these next 2 years, is that some bills that were very dear to the Bolsonaro administration were approved in the House in the last 4 years, sometime the last 4 years, and they stall in the Senate. I'm talking about gun reform bill that actually makes it easier for people to buy guns, and also the casino bill that legalizes casinos in Brazil. These bills are ready to be voted in the Senate. So this is also one of the key reasons why controlling the Senate is very important, because it gets to decide whether or not these Bolsonarista themes with guns and casinos and so on, whether they advance or whether they remain dormant.
And one thing that is interesting, because you were talking about that, and that is Rodrigo Pacheco's doing, right? He was seen as this sort of guardrail against the most extreme facets of Bolsonarism during his first 2 years as Senate president between 2021 and 2022. And that is one of the reasons why, and we saw the government, and you were on the Senate floor yesterday, so you saw that up close, and that effort of the government really engaging into getting Pacheco passed, promising executive positions, promising a whole bunch of things to lawmakers that would give them influence over the government, some more, some less. But we saw a real, true effort by the government. And it's because, I mean, Pacheco, not only he was the lesser evil, but he was like the much lesser evil. And he was seen as this sort of, he was liked both by the Lula camp because he was seen as this more flexible guy with whom it's possible to negotiate, and also markets who say, okay, if Lula tries a reform that is way too to the left, Pacheco will simply block it, as he did with the Bolsonarista agenda that was way to the right.
Yes. So originally in 2021, Pacheco won the first time he was elected Senate president in the early 2021, he was elected with support from both the Bolsonaro government at the time and the left wing. And his rival was Senator Simone Tebet, who now is a minister under Lula, but it's a different story. Rodrigo Pacheco, and the dispute between Rodrigo Pacheco and Rogério Marinho was essentially a dispute between the handler and the supplier of the secret budget. So the secret budget, which is a massive scheme designed by the Bolsonaro administration, it gave lawmakers unprecedented power over the federal budget in exchange for legislative support. Rodrigo Pacheco was a distributor, a disburser of this secret budget during the Bolsonaro years. But the source of this money was mostly or almost entirely from the Ministry of Regional Development, who was led mostly in a larger part of the Bolsonaro years by Rogério Marinho, who now became a senator. So now senators get to decide whether they pick up the original source of the money or whether they pick the guy that uses to handle this money, like the distributor. And they chose the distributor, perhaps because they're more used to him. And the other thing is, Rodrigo Pacheco is not as committed as Rogério Marinho was to the Bolsonarist agenda of let's go after the Supreme Court, let's block the Lula agenda, etc. In the
And
end,
also because some pork will be necessary for Lula to have things passed. And the fact that Pacheco is much closer to Lula than Rogério Marinho ever will be makes it easier for that supply of pork to keep flowing, right?
I think that's what a lot of senators had in mind. Also, it is hard to go against the government in Brazil, even by secret ballot, when you have someone who's close to the presidential palace. He has the support of the government. He has the support of someone with the pen to nominate people for federal offices. And a lot of the senators, they do not care about ideology. They do not care about social media pundits saying Pacheco no, or Pacheco will be a socialist or whatever. And they care about staying close to the government so they can appoint people in key positions. So this is very attractive to a lot of big center senators, which in the end is what happened.
Yeah, and Pacheco's party, the Social Democratic Party, for viewers who are not familiar with it, it's a party that when it was founded more or less a decade ago, its chairman, and essentially its owner, said that this is a party that is neither to the left, nor to the right, nor to the center, which means they play ball with whoever.
With everyone, and specifically Gilberto Kassab, which is the chairman of the party that you're talking about. Gilberto Kassab was tasked by then President Dilma Rousseff to creating the PSD, is specifically with the mission to remove lawmakers from the MDB, which then had as a whip Eduardo Cunha and so on, and was creating problems for the Dilma administration. So the party was essentially created as a big center party to attract people from the other big center party in order to form a coalition that is flexible and that can help whoever is in power. And Gilberto Kassab, at the same time, he had in different states, he would support João Dória from the center-right/left Social Democracy Party in São Paulo. He supported the Bolsonaro administration, and he would support left-wing government. So this is a party.
No, and Kassab, he was a cabinet minister for Dilma Rousseff and then voted for ousting Dilma Rousseff. So, yes. I mean, it's everything and it's contrary.
And he very soon joined the Dória administration as soon as Dória became governor, and then he had to be suspended because of legal proceedings and so on. And now this party is also Rodrigo Pacheco's party and is now the largest bench in the Senate, which means that unlike in the elections, Bolsonaro's party no longer has the largest benches in both houses. They only have the largest bench in the House, not in the Senate.
Which is a lot already. Now, is there anything we missed in the Senate? Should we move to the House?
Well, I understand that one of the important takeaways, I think, for us as a press, as a self-criticism, is that the Bolsonaro camp was really successful in trying to make support for Marinho appear larger than what it really was. It was not a tight race. Pacheco won by 17 votes over Marinho and 8 votes more than he needed to win. So this appearance or this impression that the Bolsonarista camp tried to seed on the press that Marinho is going to be a very tough competitor. It really didn't happen the way that they tried to make it appear. And the other thing is, I managed to speak to some senators yesterday, which was important. Our readers know that from the newsletter. And they were relieved or happy that Pacheco won, and that this means that it will be easier for the Lula administration to pass its agenda.
Yeah. Now, before we move on to the House, I just want to remember our viewers to support our journalism through Buy Me a Coffee. It is we have a membership program there, or you can just buy our journalists a cup of coffee. But if you want to get one of the membership tiers, it will give you access to exclusive content on Brazilian society, behind the scenes content, so you get to know how do we do our journalism and what's up with our company. You can use the QR code on, that way it's on the bottom right end of your screens. And I want to thank Rich Ahern, who bought us a cup of coffee. So Rich, thank you very much. And please, if everyone watching, if you want to contribute to independent journalism and help us continue doing what we are doing, taking a Brazilian view on Brazil and Latin America to the world, please go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report, or even better, subscribe to the Brazilian Report, which is the journalistic engine behind everything we do, from podcasts to YouTube broadcasts. Go to Brazilian.report/subscribe. Cedê, let's move on to the House, to the lower house, where it was never a contest. The only doubt was whether Arthur Lira would, the incumbent speaker, would break the all-time record in the speakership election, and he did so with flying colors, right? 464 votes out of 513 votes. So it means that almost everyone and their mothers voted for Lira. I mean, how come he has become so powerful? You explained to our readers in the newsletters. If you can talk a little bit about how Lira became this inevitable force in the House.
So Lira was also re-elected yesterday. Lira was also a key provider of the secret budget. Because of the size of the House is so much bigger than the Senate, there are much more representatives in the House than there are senators. There is much more money from the secret budget flowing to the House rather than to the Senate, which means that if Rodrigo Pacheco was a key distributor of the secret budget, Arthur Lira was an even larger distributor. He got to appoint and lead much more money in earmarks or in budget amendments. And this was very successful on this election, particularly for House members, because we had one of the highest re-election rates ever. The secret budget, which helps this Congress people appoint earmarks and appoint money to their allies or to local companies and amendments in small cities and in their constituencies and so on.
Which essentially mean, and it's very parochial, right? It's like, I brought, and it really helps. It's interesting because on one part is almost an institutionalization of vote for cash in Congress, because you would get that budgetary grant if you supported the Bolsonaro administration. But at the same time, it would allow some small constituency in the middle of nowhere to get a new health unit, a new ambulance, a new school, or tractors, things that make an impact in small constituencies, I'm sorry. And so it's at the same time that it helps small cities, it's also become like this very, it gives lawmakers this very unfair advantage against challengers because it enhances their profile, and they can claim, I am the one who brought this health unit here, I am the one who paid for this ambulance. And also it gives the government this almost illegitimate majority, right?
Yeah, it is institutionalized corruption. And we also know that because a lot of these earmarks, they are not specifically designed for good public policy. So you might have one earmark which goes to buying ambulances in a small city that doesn't have necessarily a good hospital where those ambulances could take someone to that place. The secret budget has proven to be used sometimes to pay for things that the city does not need at all, such as a given city where, on average, each citizen got more than 10 or 14 tooth extractions. So it's paying for a lot of tooth extractions, and it's paying for a lot of pork that does not necessarily amount to good public policy, but helps a lot of votes because you're essentially providing cash, easy cash, for some of your key allies. And it has also been proven, we see this in local reporting by stories such as in Estadão and Piauí magazine, that there are some city halls. These city halls do not have mayors that have allies in Congress. And if the mayor is not closely allied to a lawmaker, they get zero earmarks from the secret budget. So a lot of cities desperately need money for health or for education, and they're not getting it precisely because lawmakers were given so much power because of the secret budget, which means that technical people at the education ministry, at the health ministry, or at the regional development ministry are not having the say anymore in who gets this money. During the
And by
Bolsonaro,
the way, and there's another even more pernicious aspect about it. It's because it's extremely informal. So it's like, okay, Cedê, you tell me, I'll keep the books, but there's no paperwork as it used to have in terms of budgetary grants. And also, it's something done in secret. So lawmakers don't know how much the others are getting. And it's specifically designed, it's like a game theory thing that you if you get a lot of money, you don't have incentives to tell your peers, because then you may lose it. You may be seen as a snitch, and you lose your privileges. And also, since nobody knows how much the other ones are getting, they have more incentives to back the speaker's agenda, to be on his good graces, because he was the one who was controlling. And he even had a special office for that, a special aide, just keeping the tabs on who was getting what, right?
yes, Arthur had a specific room in the House with specific aides, and lawmakers would line up in this room, and they would go in and they would request so and so X and Y specific budget, specific earmark for their region. But in reality, officially, all these amendments were appointed or designed by one given lawmaker, which is the Rapporteur General of the budget. And this one takes the responsibility for hundreds of millions of reais in amendments, which actually are suggested by different lawmakers, and also sometimes not even by lawmakers themselves, but by someone appointed by them in a specific city hall who does not necessarily hold a specific official job. And this money for the secret budget comes from somewhere, and it comes from the national budget. And this meant that during the Bolsonaro administration, so much money was going to the secret budget that there was a lack of money for important policies, such as Farmácia Popular. Farmácia Popular is a Ministry of Health program which subsidizes private drugstores, and people that enroll in this program, they need hypertension medicine, they need common medicine. They can go in a private drugstore that already exists and get at a discounted price or even for free some medications. There was a lack of money for this program at the end of the Bolsonaro administration, because the money to buy medicine was going to tractors and tooth extractions and mysterious and shady public works that we still don't know about, precisely because the budget is secret. But it was helping lawmakers get reelected, And as we've seen, they are very thankful to Arthur Lira. One of the lawmakers that got, or said he got, a lot of money from the secret budget to help someone get elected was Senator Marcos Duval. So Senator Marcos Duval told in an interview last year that he was given 50 million reais, that's $10 million in earmarks from the secret budget in order to vote for Rodrigo Pacheco in early 2021, which I believe brings us to the next topic.
Yes, before we get to that, I just want to talk a little bit, because we talk about how Lira got to where he is. In terms of what that means to the government, it doesn't mean a lot, right? Because even though the Workers' Party endorsed Lira, it was more an endorsement because Lira was obviously going to win, so better to be on his side than against him. But I mean, getting Lira on the government side will take a heavy dose of horse trading, right? And each important vote will mean Lira will have new demands and more demands, right?
Yeah, it just means business as usual. The Lula administration decided not to pick a fight it could not win, and they decided to go with the status quo because Lira was already elected in early 2021 with a large voting basis, and everything indicated that lawmakers from all parties, especially from the big center parties and also from the Bolsonarista camp that were elected in late 2022, they will endorse Lira anyway. So Lula decided to adopt the Godfather motto of keep your enemies closer, keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. And so he decided to be close with Lira and try to negotiate with him. Lira was very, very helpful for the Bolsonaro administration. He passed a lot of Bolsonaro administration bills without committee discussion. He just shoved them into a House floor vote, and they were voted quickly. And when they arrived to the Senate, they stalled. But Lira was a much closer friend to Bolsonaro than Mr. Pacheco was. And Lira even placed the so-called printed ballot bill to a floor vote, despite it having been rejected in the Senate. And this bill was one of the efforts by the Bolsonaro administration to seed doubt about the electronic voting system. And Lira was a big coordinator and a big enabler of this agenda.
Yeah, and by the way, not necessarily by ideological proximity to Bolsonaro, but because pork was pouring,
Yes.
which Lula will have to do if he wants the same level of support from Lira. But
Yep.
So moving on to the subject that you introduced, Senator Marcos Duval, who made some pretty bold and I would say also weird allegations since the first hours of today. Can you tell us a little bit what he said and the developments from that?
Yeah, so first we need to introduce the reader about who Senator Marcos Duval is. Senator Marcos Duval is a senator, first-term senator from that. There he is. Senator Marcos Duval is a first-term senator from Espírito Santo. He was elected in 2018 in the Bolsonarista wave of electing non-career politicians and new people with new faces and fresh faces that were not with the old politics and draining the swamp and so on and so forth. Marcos Duval has worked in the United States as the owner of a private company that used to do police instruction. So they would do training for police forces in how to handle people, how to wrestling techniques and so on with for the police. But he's not a police officer himself. He was the owner of a private company that had police departments in the United States as clients. Despite this, and you can see some pictures of him, he wears a pin reading SWAT. And he talks about being the SWAT candidate and the SWAT man and so on and so forth. But here's something that not everybody knows. SWAT is not actually a thing that exists. SWAT means special weapons and tactics. And so there are different police units in different states and different cities in the United States that might have a SWAT unit. So the Los Angeles police might have a SWAT unit, New York police has a SWAT unit, in Texas they have, etc. But SWAT is not a thing. It's not a department like NASA or the FBI is. SWAT is a type of operation, a type of department, and different police units might or might not have a SWAT unit. But you cannot be a SWAT guy. You need to be a SWAT guy from a specific police. But even so, he claims that he's a SWAT guy, which is already very shady. Anyway, the second thing that the reader must know about Marcos Duval is that he's very experienced in telling very bold things and backtracking from them. So in July last year, he gave an interview to Estadão, which is one of the major Brazilian newspapers, and he said to Estadão, I was given 50 million reais in earmarks from the secret budget to vote for Rodrigo Pacheco in early 2021. This interview was recorded. There's audio that exists and was published by the newspaper. And even so, Marcos Duval issued a communique after the interview was out that he didn't mean it and that people took him wrongly. And there's nothing to take him wrongly. He said things very explicitly, and it's very clearly what he said. The audio is there, but he's trying to backtrack me for something that was recorded. Okay, so what's new about Marcos Duval? In the early hours of this Thursday, Marcos Duval was in a live broadcast, just like me and Gustavo are. And he said in this live broadcast, you know what? I gave an interview to Veja, that's a weekly news magazine. And in this interview, I told that I was coerced by President Bolsonaro in participating in a coup attempt. And people are like, what? What are you saying?
And you know more details on Friday after the story.
Yes, and you have more details on Friday when the magazine comes out. Veja is a weekly news magazine, and it comes out every Friday as a weekly news magazine should. And hours later, Marcos Duval added more to the story. He posted on Instagram this morning that he was going to resign. I'm out of politics. I cannot stand this anymore. And I'm going to return to my career in the United States. Those are his precise words. But Marcos Duval is the kind of person that says a lot of things. And when you say a lot of things, you say a lot of different things, and you keep communicating. And instead of just saying a message and shutting up, you keep saying different things and keep giving different interviews. So this morning also, he gave a press conference in the Senate. And in this press conference, he already starts to backtrack from things that he said earlier. So now in this press conference, instead of having Bolsonaro as the central figure in this coup attempt, together with former Congressman Daniel Silveira, now he's trying to make it appear that Daniel Silveira is exclusively to blame and that Bolsonaro was not the main actor as he said earlier to Veja. And also he's saying, you know what? The decision to resign has not yet been made. He told it he was resigning. No, I cannot resign because I don't like my alternate and I cannot undo the work in the next 4 years.
No, and by the way, the coup plot that he described is so cartoonish, right? Because it was Bolsonaro and a former congressman who was jailed just this morning as well. I mean, never a dull moment in Brazil. So Bolsonaro and this congressman invited Marcos Duval for a chat in the presidential palace, where they would say, okay, you know Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who is Brazil's chief electoral justice. So just chat with him, see if he's going to spill the beans on some weird things like that might have happened during the election or something that was not above board. And then we're going to have this recording and we're going to call for his impeachment and possibly arrest, and then we can overturn the election, which of course has so many, I mean, let's assume this is true, and this is a major if. That being said, let's assume this is true. So it's assuming that Alexandre de Moraes, who has waged war against Bolsonarism for months now, years even, and who was extremely tough during the conduction of the electoral process, he would have to be sufficiently dumb to be alone with a pro-Bolsonaro man and tell that maybe he was stealing the election against Bolsonaro, which, by the way, even Bolsonaro has openly admitted there is no evidence whatsoever that there's the slightest problem with Brazil electronic system. So, I mean, it's cartoonish.
It is very cartoonish, and that's precisely why it's believable, because everything in Bolsonarismo is cartoonish. It is never a straightforward plan. It's always something very shady. Just to give an example to the readers about Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro is the kind of person that can never commit to a single thing. So, for example, during the Bolsonaro administration, he used to have two different prominent lawyers. You had Karina Kufa, who was more working with his party, his political party, and so on. And you had Frederico Weissef, who hosted a man who was searched by the police at his own house. But then you go to the petition that the Liberal Party presented late last year, which was the most serious coup-mongering petition ever. Bolsonaro's party formally challenged the election in the Supreme Court, and in this petition they asked it to cancel dozens of millions of votes because of the conspiracy theory that the newest voting machines cannot be trusted, and so on and so on. But the thing is, the lawyers that submitted this petition are not Karina Kufa and are not Frederico Weissef. So who is Bolsonaro's lawyers? The guy cannot even commit to having, I have this lawyer, I have this spokesman. There's always a plan B, a plan C.
And Cedê, to your point, everything is always so cartoonish, and that also helps Bolsonaro get off the hook, right? Because everything is so outlandish that people just scoff at things like, okay, this is a senator of the Republic saying that the former president recruited him to overthrow the election. I mean, yes. This is so many levels of wrong. And yes. I mean, outside of the political junkie world and of the news media, and we political journalists, we go after these things and we want to go until the end of it. But people just scoff like, oh yeah, right. I mean, yeah, Bolsonaro doing coup-mongering things. Yeah, sure. It's just another Thursday.
Yeah, that's one of the things with Bolsonarismo and Trumpism, because it's so cartoony. And the danger is people do not take this seriously, but in fact, it is very serious. It's the same thing with chloroquine. People mock that Bolsonaro was offering a chloroquine box to the birds in the Alvorada Palace, literally.
An ostrich, yeah.
The ostrich. This was absolutely crazy, but it's also serious because if you are taking chloroquine, then you believe you're safe from a very dangerous disease, and it's possible that you're not taking the vaccine, and so on and so forth. So the cartoony things, they mask a dangerous reality. As I've written, and I follow Daniel Silveira very closely because of the ethics committee and so on, it is not out of character for former Congressman Daniel Silveira, who, as you said, was arrested today. It is not out of character for him to conclude such a plan, because Daniel Silveira himself recorded, without authorization, a meeting of his own party at the House in 2019. And he recorded this meeting. He admitted to recording this meeting. And he was punished by the ethics committee for recording this meeting. So this habit, Daniel Silveira is unlike Marcos Duval. He is former police. It is not out of habit for him to try to come up with solutions that involve, I'm going to record you, and then I'm going to use this either to blackmail or either to try to get people to understand something out of context. I understand what you're saying from a reasonable perspective. Alexandre de Moraes would never admit to doing something that he didn't do in the first place, because there's no illegal tampering whatsoever. And he wouldn't admit something wrong even if he had done it, because he's not so stupid. But the Bolsonaro plan, if it is true, if it's Marcos Duval, is true, and I believe that there is at least some element, because it's very in character with Daniel Silveira for this plan. If this is true, he was only looking for an excuse, some out of context sentence that Moraes would say, oh yeah, but you know what? Justice Barroso said, for example, said the sentence, perdeu mané, you lost it, brother. and the Bolsonaristas took it that this proves that Barroso was a partial judge and that he was against Bolsonaro from the first place. So any sentence that he could record Moraes could be enough to justify a coup or justify any measure, just to prove that, as I said all along, Moraes was a partial judge, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think with that we can wrap. We a lot of things to cover today, but Cedê, thank you again for your participation. And before we let everyone go, just one more time, please subscribe to the Brazilian Report. That what is keeping our journalism alive and well. And also go to Buy Me a Coffee next to your left shoulder, Cedê. That's right. You have that QR code. You can donate cups of coffee to our journalists, and you can also get exclusive content on how we do our journalism or on Brazilian society. So there's a lot of things that you can enjoy there. Please go to buymeacoffee.com/subscribe. Cedê, thank you very much. Have a good one, man.
Thank you. Have a great one, too.
Ciao.